Good afternoon, folks. We're going to pick up where we left off with Flickless 7. So I'm just getting to the Flickless folder here. Make sure I have the right. Okay, we have the database here. Set it back up to use the Flicklist database. Okay. All right. What if I can duplicate this? Nope. Cool. So we've got the database. We'll put that second. No, put that third. We'll have where we're going to run the server second. All right, and then the first one we'll use for changing stuff. Okay. So we were looking at how the login works. Okay, so let me log out. So if we want to register a new account, we can, and that logs us in. Or if we want to log in, ooh, does the login not work? Ah, here we go. The login link in the home or the base HTML login is supposed to bring us to the login route. We're missing the slash there. Let's see if that fixes it. Okay, and then let's see if there's even a login route first. There isn't a login route. Okay. Well, we'll get there. Let's look at how the register logs us in. So I have to create another new email. So we'll do n register. All right. It says don't use a 1-character password. What are you, insane? Okay, and then you can see at the top right, they're printing out the username of whoever's logged in, or the email address. It's using the email address as the username. Okay. So if I go to the ratings page, it still knows that I'm logged in here. If I go back to the home page, it still knows that I'm logged in. So we haven't talked about how it can keep that information. right? Because we haven't, the ways we've talked about sending information between the views or the web pages through HTTP, we've used the post method and we've used the get method. And we don't see the username up in the URL, so we're not using get. So let's take a look at how it is doing that. So we'll go to the register route. And I talked about this last time. It's checking to make sure that your registration stuff is correct here. So proper email, passwords match, yada yada. Well, they haven't put in how to verify the password, but you just have to check that the fields are the same, right? In here, we'll come back and do these. We don't want people to create an account with the same email someone else has. We don't want two accounts with the same email, because that's what we're using as the username. That's our primary key, or using it as at least as a unique field. So we can't have two accounts with the same email address. So we have to put in a check for those two, and then flash a error, if that is. So anyway, then we're creating a user if they pass that, they've entered in the correct information. We're creating a user object by using the user constructor. We're taking in the email from the form and storing it in the property of the user object that we're creating. So we're taking the email from the form and we're putting it in the property of the object. Same with password. Okay, so these are the same, these look like the same name, but we're implying different variables. Okay, so these are both variables, but one is the one on the left is the property in the object. The one on the right, we actually created that up here by pulling the information from the form. Okay, so what this means is in the user class, right here, we set up the constructor. It needs an email and a password to create the object. And you always just have to include self here because of the way Python works with object-oriented programming. Its workaround is you just keep passing the object as itself into the methods. That's how it can change it. So you can just take that you just have to trust me on that, I guess. Okay, anyway, then they're adding it to the database. And then line 69 here on mine, this is how we're keeping track of who's logged in. So right here, looking at this, you can tell it's a dictionary because it has indexes that are referenced by keys. So we're saying in the session dictionary, for the user key, store the email of whatever they entered. And then that session dictionary is coming from Flask, the Flask package. Right here we're importing it. Okay, and so it knows to use that between HTTP requests to store the information somewhere outside of the web page. And so no matter what page you enter, you'll always be able to grab variables out of the session. So if I want to add another variable into the session, I can say, let's add color. It doesn't matter. Well, let's not do that. Let's do food. All right, and we'll just store apple in there. Okay. So now in the session, we're storing the user key with the value of the email of whoever registered, and we're storing just this random thing I'm creating food, the food key with the value of apple. If you're in or have taken the Python class, remember to create a dictionary. You do this. Dict, that's the variable name. And then if we want to put some values in there, we use curly braces. And so the dictionary above, the session dictionary would look like this. It has user as a string and the email as a string. So we just entered n at n.n. So it would look like this. And then we added another key of food with a value of apple. Okay, so these two things are now stored in the session and we can pull them out whenever we want. What we're going to use that for is whenever anyone visits a page that they need to be logged in for, we will check if there is a user, if there's a value in the session variable for a user key. If not, then we know no one's logged in and we can redirect them back to the login screen. Okay. And also, if we know their email, we can use that to query the database if we need to pull any information stored in there about the user. Like how about what movies they have watched, or, you know, it's on their watch list. What movies are on their watch list. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out for now because we don't need that. All right, so after it logs you in, which is just putting this value in the user session in the session dictionary with the key of user. I'm repeating myself because this is the terminology that you need to understand and use. This isn't a list. It's not. This is a dictionary, and we know because the index here is not a number. You can use numbers for keys in a dictionary, so you can't always rely on that, but if it's a string here, I know it's a dictionary. Let's go ahead and just print out the dictionary. This is a good way to see what's in there in case things aren't working. You should always find a way to look at the data. This is kind of a manual way to debug your code. So I'm just going to do print session. This should print out in the terminal. Usually I get one disconnect. Hopefully I don't get more. All right. It must have disconnected while I was holding down the parenthesis because I got a lot of parentheses there. So we're just going to print out session so we can see what's in the dictionary at this point. All right, so I'm going to save it. We're going to have to register again to get that code to run, so I'm going to clear the terminal here because we want to be able to find this. And actually, let's go ahead and make it easier to find. So we're going to print the session, and we will put a bunch of blank lines before it and a bunch of blank lines after. So that should stick out like a sore thumb. Now, a comma there. Okay, let's see if we can get it to work. So, go back to the front page. Uh-oh, I forgot to start the server. Make sure this has focus before I start typing. Okay, so from this point on, every time there's a request, it'll show up in the terminal. So, all right, I've connected. So it's saying, wow, a lot happens just when someone logged in accesses the page. It runs the setup. So that I can run the select statement to pull the movies. Okay, and then here's the actual request. Here's the IP address, 127.0.0.1. That should be familiar to you. That's our loopback address for our own computer. Here's the time that it was accessed. It was a GET request using this version of the HTTP protocol, and we got a message of we sent a message of 200, which means all's good in the neighborhood. So now let's go ahead and create a new, or let's log out and see what that does. Okay, logging out did 3 things. It sent a post request with a 302, a GET request with a 302, and then a GET register with 200. So when we tried to go to /logout, it sent us to the index page, which sent us to the register page. Let's look up what 302 is. It just means a URL redirection, which is what happened. That's what we're doing, we're redirecting. Okay. So now we got a big mess to look through, but that's okay. So let's register. All right. Let's try no, let's not do anything crazy. Z at z.z. Z. Okay. Register. And now, let's take a look. Where is that? So here, oh good, I highlighted this. That's a good way to test. So there was the bringing us back to the register. Okay, when we hit logout, you brought us to register. Here, it's beginning a database insert after we hit the register button, where we put in the information, it passed the checks. Now it is writing the query to pass in the email and password. Okay, so that inserts that into the database and commits it. Okay, and then we are pulling the user ID and the email and the password from user, and then we're using the user email here. No, I guess we're taking in the user ID. Yeah. So we're taking in the user ID. This user has an ID of 2 because it's the second one I created since I reset the database. Remember, that's on auto increment. And then look, this thing's floating out here with a bunch of spaces around it. What is this? This is the dictionary we're printing out. Remember, we put the username in the session here. Okay, and then we put the, we just set food to Apple here. So we now have access to a session variable of user and a session variable of food with these values. So we can add more to it. We can pull those out at any time. we can store data for the user in a session. Okay? Until we end that session, or they close the browser. So down in register, we're storing that in the session. Okay, that makes that they're logged in there. And then we put them back to index. And when we click log out, it goes to the logout route. Right here. And that does this right here. First thing it does is it deletes the session key of user and the value out of the session. So now it doesn't know who's logged in, and it sends you back to the index. All right. And then we know we can't get to the index, right? So if I manually try to get to the index, well, if we're logged out and we try to get to the index. If we're logged in, we can get to the index. But if we're not logged in, it puts us at register, and if we try to go to the home page, it redirects us to register. If we try to just go straight to the home page, it brings us back to register. Where is that happening? Well, they've set that up in here in a clever way. Down here, there is a route you can create right here. This app.beforeRequest. And so what this is doing is saying you will run this function before every request, before you deliver the requested information. You will run the require login function. So they just made that name. You can make it whatever you want. You do have to use app.beforeRequest though. That is from Flask. Down here it says if not, so this is looking for this to be false to be true, right? If this evaluates to false, it will use the not operator here to convert it to true, and then it will do this. So we're checking if there is a user key in the session or if the request endpoint is register. So this is limiting access to every page unless there is a user logged in or if they're going to the register page. So if either of those, well, it's an or, so that means they both have to be false for this to be false. So here they've actually created a NOR. Logically, they've created a NOR. So for this thing to redirect you to register, these both have to be false. So you can't be logged in, and you can't be trying to go to the register page to get it to redirect you to register. All right. Okay, so that's that. So this is how, again, this is how you get, this is how you control how users get around in your site. You can set up something like this, which blocks access to anytime they try to access a page, it's going to redirect them back to register unless they're logged in or trying to register. So if the request is the endpoint of register, so the register route, then they can go there if they're not logged in. All right. So let's follow through with that and create a login page. So it's asking us up here, add a login route with get and post. Okay. The reason, looking at this, why would we need get and post? So we need a get request if we just want to pull the page without sending information to it to process through a post method. And so we have to include the get request because we are going to want people to get the form to log in the first time they access login. And then when they hit OK after they type their username and password, it'll go back to itself, but this time it'll have post data. So we do not show the form, we show a message. If they logged in correctly, we will redirect them out of the login page to the home page. But now they'll be logged in, so we just have to put their ID in the session dictionary. All right. So first, let's create the route. All right. We don't have to type this from scratch. We have a ton of routes to pull from. Okay. Make sure you rename things if you copy them. Okay, so first things first. We need to check if method is post. If request.method equals post, right here. Okay. So this is saying run this code if they have submitted the form. Okay. And then if we put an else, we say run this code if they have not submitted the form. Okay. So the else is going to be where we return. Is it render? Yeah, render template. So we want to give them a template with a form. So it says down here, create login template. So we'll just call it login.html. We haven't created it yet, but we'll add it as a file. And we don't really need to send any information to the form. In this case, we don't have any information to send, so that's all we need there. But if we have form data, we need to access that. Okay, so we'll pull that from the request. So if we have post data, get the email, get the password, and then you're going to check if those are in the database. How are we going to check that? What do we know? How can we check if that's in the database? If that username and password combination is in the database? Well, we need to query the database, right? So are we querying the database somewhere? I think in the home page we are. So we can just copy the code out of there as a starting point. I guess not. I guess we're not doing that. Here we go. Here is a query. This one's for looking at the movies. So we're going to need to make ours something different. Is this where it is? Nope, that's where we have selected. We need to go back to login. So I'm just going to search. Okay. You need to be able to navigate your larger files quickly. So Control F is your friend you just hit Control F, type the word you're looking for, and then you can keep hitting enter, and it'll go through all of that word. So here's the login route with the login method. Okay, so we have the email and password from the form. We need to use that to search for a record that has those. So we want to search the user table. We're going to run a query. We're going to filter by all records that have an email equal to the email variable up here. And we're going to search also for where it needs both. It needs a matching email in the record and it needs a matching password. Okay. And then we will only grab the first record. All right. And I think, let's print out what this returns just so you can see. Also, no one can get to the login page, so we need to add in another endpoint that we can use while not logged in. So we can do or request dot endpoint equals login. Now, if we're going to have a lot of pages, obviously this is going to get ridiculously long. So what we can do is we can just create a master list of the endpoints that you can access from or while not logged in. So we can just create a variable to hold that, which we're creating our variables after we've defined our classes here. So I can create something called endpoints, a list called endpoints, and we'll just store the routes. So you can go to register and you can go to login if you're not logged in. Oops. All right, and so now we can do, instead of saying user is in session, so what this is going to do is it's going to look through every value in session to find a user key. So here we want to say, instead of just checking each one individually, we have a list of them. So we can do if request.endpoint is in endpoints. So if they try to access the login route, it'll say is login in the endpoints list. If it is, we can go there. And then let's say we go to the add route for adding a movie. That's not in the endpoints. So that'll make this true, which will convert it to false. And then it won't redirect you. It'll allow you to continue on with loading the page. So it'll only redirect you if you try to go somewhere that's not in the endpoints. And now as we add new routes, we can add those in to the endpoints if we want people to be able to access them while not logged in. Like an about page or legal stuff that anyone on the site needs to look at even if they're not logged in. Okay. So now let's go back to the login. So now we can actually access this. we need to create the form template so that you can actually try to log in. All right, so let's go into templates. We can just use the register template here. It's very close to a login. So we'll copy that, add a new one for login.html is what we named it in the render template, so let's follow through with that. Okay, open it up. What, did I just create a folder? That's not what I wanted. Delete that. Okay. I wonder if we can just duplicate this. Is that an option? No. All right, so we go into templates and we want to do new file. Login.html. I'm going to put the code we copied from registering. We'll say login. When you click this, it needs to go to the login route with post data from the form. And we already have an email and a password field here. We don't need to verify the password. That'd be interesting. To do in a login. Be kind of annoying though. All right. And then we need the submit button. We can just leave all the rest of this the same. Don't reinvent the wheel. Okay. So now, when we enter in the login information, it will print out this, and then we'll just have it redirect us back to login. So we'll just render the same template here. All right. So I just want to see what the database grabs when we run this query. It's a good thing to test your query before you start adding. Before you start moving on, assuming that this is going to work and grab those pieces and use it to test. Let's make sure it's actually grabbing the right stuff. Okay. So what we have now is when we go to the login route, it's going to show us a form that says email and password. If we type in an email and password, it will run a query using that email and password. We're going to see what the query returns. Let's make sure it's still running. It is. Okay, we have a lot of stuff here, so I will highlight this so we can see where it starts. And we will refresh the page. Okay, so there's the get request from refreshing. Now we want to try to log in. Oh, we got to the login page. That means we set up properly to be able to access that. Okay, let's put in a wrong email. And we should probably not call this field new password. I'll go ahead and change that now before I forget. That is in the login template. Don't want to confuse the user. That's very important. They're confused enough as it is, right? Okay, it brought us back so that we could see what we get. So here's where we started. So it's setting up to access the database here. And then down here, we're using select user ID as user ID, user email as user email, and user password as user password from the user table, where the user.email is what we typed in, and the password is blah, blah, blah. All right, and here is probably the result. So it's none, Okay, so if it doesn't find a matching record, it'll return none. Okay, we can use that. So in the login route, if the login was unsuccessful, we know that if the result from the query is none. So under main.py, we can do, so login with information. We're going to run this query, and we're going to say, store it in a variable first. So put it back here, and we'll say, let's call it login. We aren't using that. Well, we're using that as the function name, so maybe not. Let's use login deets. Okay, so that'll get stored in there, and then we'll say if login deets is none. See how it turns blue? That's an actual value in Python. So if it's none, we should send them back to the login page, all right, and give them an error. So we'll try this flash. We'll see where that goes. I'm going to change it to zoinks because zoiks is not a thing that I'm aware of. Okay, so if login deets is none, we'll take a flash. Oh, that's probably using it. That's probably being put in the base. Let's see. Yeah. So when you load the base template, it's going to check. You can use this function here, get flashed messages, and they have a loop here that's just going to print out all the error messages. So that's set up here. Now if we ever want to set up a error message to show up, we just have to use the flash method. So here we're going to flash something if the username and password is incorrect. So we'll put wrong login info, and then we'll send that back to the login. Okay. So if it isn't none, we can put this in the else. What does that mean? Well, before we put the else, let's go ahead and print this again when we try to log in. But this time, let's put the correct information. So we're going to print login deets after it pulls it out of the database. See what it pulls when we try to log in. Okay, it's trying to. If I hit refresh, it's asking me if I want to resend the data that we just sent. I don't, so I'm just going to click up in here and hit enter. Okay, so now the post data is cleared. Let's see, we got this request. So here's where we are before we enter the information. And so now let's use one that we have in there. What is, I did n at n.n and the password of n. I should probably change the button from register. That's, again, going to be confusing. So login. There we go. So login. Okay. The function either returned none or ended without a return statement. That's because I forgot in the route, every path in the program needs to return either a render template or a redirect. And so this else here needs to go in, I think. Oh, no, not that. This does need to go with this one. But if we don't have a case where login deets is not none, so we do need an else here. So let me make sure you understand this. Let's say we go to the login route from the link. The method is not going to be post because we haven't submitted a form. So it'll go to the else, render template login. Okay, that works. Let's say we have submitted the form. It'll run this code, run the query, and then it will try to, well, it'll check if the value is none. So they didn't find that combination in the database. In that case, bring them back to login. And we're going to flash a message. They put the wrong info. But what if this is false? Where's it going to go? Well, it'll go past this, so that way it doesn't hit a render. It'll go down below this, and there's no render, so it just breaks. So how do we fix it? Well, we can put an else here. This is where we're going to make it actually log them in. So for now, we'll just send them back to login. We'll fix that later. And so I remember, and I don't have to retrace all the steps, I'll put this, fix this to login. All right. So it'll only get here if they have correct login information that matches one of the combinations in the database. So let's go back to login, and I'll just click up here, run it, and let's check to make sure the server is still going. It is. Okay. So there's where we refresh the page. And now we'll try logging in as n again. N at n.n. N. Log in. Okay. No error this time. So it returned a user object, and it's showing the email address here. Why is it showing that? We actually programmed it to do that. So in the user class, down here, this REPR, represent, this is what it prints out when you try to print the object. So we have it printing out its email. So let's see if we want it to print out, not sure what this operator is. Oh, I know what that is. We're printing out the name of the class here, and then let's do I'm not sure if this will actually work, but let's print out the self dot ID and the percent self dot password. This is a bad idea to print all this out, but I just want to show you that it's getting that information so that we can use it, because we need the ID to keep track of the session. So let's go back, let's log out. Oh, I guess it never logged us in, right? We never set that up. Let's try logging in again as n and n. Okay, so, oh, I never saved it. Ooh-wee. How much time do I waste making these simple mistakes? This is what happens when you don't use it every day. So if you get, if you're doing this as a job, it's going to become second nature to you. But since I only use this one day out of every 7 days, it's easy to make mistakes. Okay, so we got the server going. Let's try logging in again so we can see what it prints out since we changed the REPR method in the user class. Not all arguments converted during string formatting. Alright, so it might be returning the ID as an int, so we need to convert that to a str. No, I'm trying to cast it, wrong language. I'll do this, see if that fixes it. Let me go over that error here for you, because you need to understand these errors. Alright, so type error. It's talking about data type. So somewhere we have the wrong data type. And so it says, not all arguments converted during a string formatting. Okay, and we scroll down. Here's where it threw the error. And then it went up to this method, this method. These are in the Flask app.py. We don't need to care about that code. But we care about, once we get down to our actual file, main.py. So it says in the login, on line 61, when we try to print login deets, it says this is the line that gives us the error. What is the pin? I don't know. Oh, here's the pin. Oh, so this is some nice little protection if you forget to turn off the debugger, I guess. Copy that. I don't know what this does. I've never needed to look further into this. Ooh, okay. I don't know what that does. Okay, so anyway, it's that line we just changed about printing the object right here. So it's saying one of these is not a string. Okay, did I save it? Let's save everything. I knew so on this line somewhere something was not a string and it needs a string. Okay, let's go back to login. Try to log in once again. All right. So let me see what that. I'm not sure what that percent does. It's probably shorthand for formatting or something. Python dot, or no, Python string percent. Oh. No. Merge. Nope. Alright, I have no idea, so let's try a way I do know. And so we can do try string.format. And we have 3 values, so we can put in the indexes of them are 0, 1, and 2, because we have 3 values. And then we can do dot format. And then we can just provide these as arguments into format, and it'll plug them into the string. Oops. We'll see if that works. I'll have to figure out what that percent sign was doing. I'm not sure if this will work. Okay. Again, it's okay not to know everything. You just have to know how to look it up. Let's try it again. Okay. Now we can look at the output. Okay. So here are the values. Here is the email, here's the ID, and here is the password. So this returned a user object, and we can pull these values out to use them to compare. Now it pulled out an object because we, in the query, we use this dot first. That'll grab the first record result from this query and store it in an object, or create an object from the class, and then we're just storing it in this variable so we can access it. Okay. So if it finds a record, that means that it was the correct login information. We can log them in by setting the session user key to the ID. Where do we get that ID from? From the object that we pulled out of the database, login deets.id. And now they're logged in. And we want to redirect them to the home page. Redirect to slash. Make sure I'm doing a redirect right. Yes. Okay. So if they log in with the correct information, it should log them in now, because we're creating the session, and it can use that on the other pages, because like in the index route, it will grab get current watch list, and that get current watch list is pulling all the movies from the movie table, because we are not storing them yet by user. So let's see if we can log in first, and then we'll demonstrate what that means. So finally, let's reload the page here, make sure everything's good. This user is going to log in. Okay, now we're logged in. Okay, it's not showing the username up here anymore, it's showing the ID, so let's fix that. That's in the base HTML. So the base HTML is going to hold everything that's going to show up on every page. Okay, so we should have the navigation links in the header, up in on the base, because that's going to need to be on every page. And then the footer information can be in here, but I don't think we care about that right now. Okay. so we are printing out session.user here. So we need to put inside of the route so every route that requires login, we're passing in the session user. Where's that at? Right, so when we render this template, nope, not that one. How about the, well, let's just look. So let's look where we are using the session. Don't get confused with the database session and the app session. The database session is for building up the commands you're going to run on the database, like adding records or updating them. And then when you commit, it'll run those. That's different than the session dictionary that we're using to keep track of who's logged in and any other variables we want. So it looks like, I know we got to be using this somewhere. Let's go back to the base here. Oh, so we natively have access to the session variables even in our templates. So how can we get this to print out the email instead? Well, when we log in, we can just pull the email into a separate session variable. So it logs you in when you register, and it logs you in when you log in. And so we're doing the same thing on both of them. We're getting the, once we have the username and the password, we can create the session based on the user information. So let's just create a function for login, so that way we don't have to repeat that code, and every time we have to log in or do something, we can just have a method that does that for us. Okay, so let's do define. We'll call it what? Well, we already have a function called login, so we can't call it login. So let's call it, I don't know, check login. And we want to pass in a variable for the user. Well, let's pass in a variable for the user, for the email, and let's see, how do we want to do this? Because when you register, it's pulling the information from the form to log you in, and when you log in, it's checking it in the database. So what we would have to do is, after you register, check to see if your information is in the database to grab out the record. I think that would be the best way to do it. So we just have to pass in the user object here. And then we can do, oh no, here we go. We'll call this create login session. There we go. I don't need this anymore. Okay, so we'll create a session for the ID. the user, which will be, well, actually, yeah, user, because it's programmed in everywhere as user. We'll set that as the user.id. We'll store the email in email, and that'll be user.email. All right, and I think that's it for now. And so now we can just run this function whenever we want to have them log in. So remember, that's in the registration and in the login route. So we have a little extra work to do in the register. So let's go down to login first. Okay. So instead of putting in the setting up the session right here, we can call our function and we can pass in login deets, because that's where we're storing the user result from the query. And we're using first, so it's grabbing just one object. So this is a user object. And then down here, we don't have to create the session like this. If we want to change how the session logs in, we can just change this function. So we've kind of centralized that function, that task, into that function. Okay. So now we have to do the same thing in register, but there's no query in register, so after we insert it, we need to search for it again. Actually, no, we don't. Never mind. We actually create the object first, so I was thinking we'd have to do extra stuff, and we don't. We actually just need to put in this create login session from the user object. So right here, where we've created the user object right here. We're storing it in user with a lowercase u, so we don't need this anymore. What we need is this. Let's see if I'm right. We don't need this printing anymore. I end up with a lot of extra print statements in there, so I can quickly check in the output what the values are, and that way you can check if the values are incorrect. Now, in more complicated programming, you can actually program the computer to watch the values so that when you change something, it'll let you know when values are wrong. And this removes a lot of QA work and human testing, because it just does it all for you. And it will say, hey, you broke everything. Here's where it broke. And then you can see, well, you know, whatever you changed could have caused some kind of cascading effect that broke a lot of different things. So maybe you can optimize all of those things to work with whatever you're trying to add. Anyway, this is so small compared to something where you would need to do that. And I cannot remember. Oh, that's called unit testing. If you get into an interview where people are developing applications or building software, and you don't have to understand how to use it, you just need to know what it is. If you know what unit testing is, what is unit testing? It'll be very impressive to whoever's hiring you. So it says unit testing is a software testing method by which individual units of source code are tested to determine whether they are fit for use. So you can write a program that will, it'll run all of the functions and make sure the output is correct. So for example, if you are requiring some sort of output or using a variable that's always supposed to be a currency number, and it puts a letter or it puts a string in there somewhere, or it puts a negative number, you don't want those. Well, sometimes you can have negative numbers in currency, but you don't, whoever's bank account that is, doesn't want a negative number. But anyway, it can tell you when things are weird. You can set certain ranges. So anyway, you can program the test so you don't have to constantly look at it. On something small like this, I'm doing the unit testing. I'm printing out the variables and I'm eyeballing it and I'm watching the errors. But at a certain point, it becomes unmanageable by one person, so that's why unit testing is so useful. So research it on your own. We will definitely talk about it more in the future if you continue on in the program. Okay, we're testing out our login function that we created, which is, it didn't ask us to do this, but at this point in your programming experience, you should be able to create functions that allow you to limit the amount of repeated code you're using, especially functions. Now, you're learning about, either you're going to or you have learned about classes and objects in C#. You should know why we're using those. In this case, we're using them because we need to with Flask, but it makes things a whole lot easier because you can attach properties and methods to objects. So you don't have to write a million functions and keep track of a million variables. All right, testing this. It's running. Let's log out. Okay, let's log in and log into N. So it should show 1 up here, but the reason I did this was so that we would have the email stored in the session, so that way we can use it in the base.html, so it doesn't just show their ID up at the top. We want to use the email. So if there is a user logged in, the only way they could have logged in is through register or login, and that pulls their email and puts it in the session. So we should be able to print out the email here, hopefully, right? Okay. So now if I log in, we are showing the email up here. We have the user ID field and we have their email field values stored in the session, so we can access those on any template now or from any route. All right, so we're out of time for today. We did get through quite a bit here. You should know, after watching this, you should be able to build a login authentication system in Python and use the database and understand that. The next thing we definitely want to talk about is we should not be storing our passwords as plain text. It's a huge security risk, and I believe, it may be illegal. I don't know. If you know that something is storing your password as plain text, you do not want to use that. And so that's a huge red flag that the person that created that has no idea what they're doing. So if you ever are on a website or in an app and you have to reset your password and you click I forgot my password and they send you your password, that means they have it in plain text that's somewhere. That's why all the emails when you forget your password are going to be, okay, reset my password, because they don't have your password. They have a one-way encrypted version of your password that they'll never be able to figure out what your password is from. They don't want to. So we'll look at how to do that next time. So have a good day, and I'll see you next week. If COVID hasn't taken me.